Chapter 4. Acing the Interview. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Don't make me laugh. John Bonville, The Book of Evidence. You've outsmarted the personality tests and gotten through the HR force field, but don't get cocky. This just means they think you're mentally acceptable for the job. You shook the psychological 8-ball and used your tilt skills to surface that signs point to yes message. But this just means your real charm work is about to begin. Luckily, you know you're going to be scrutinized in the job interview, so you can prepare. Yes, you naturally make a good first impression, and that's great, but don't get lazy and rely on it. In the interview, you need to give off not just a good impression, but the impression that you are talented yet humble and a team player, well-suited for the job, highly motivated, and in demand. Getting things right straight out of the gate will make things insanely easier for you. So this is the time to strike. You don't get a second chance to make a first impression is common knowledge. But why? In Blink, Malcolm Gladwell suggests people are extremely good at rapid cognition, or what he calls thin slicing, which is the ability to pick up a huge amount of complex situational information in an incredibly short period of time. He says, a person watching a silent 2-second video clip of a teacher he or she has never met will reach conclusions about how good that teacher is that are very similar to those of a student who has sat in the teacher's class for an entire semester. That's the power of our adaptive unconscious. The moment you walk into the room, the interviewer is thin slicing you whether he's aware of it or not. He's never met you before. He knows what he decides about you could have a serious effect on his own future and well-being. He's paying close attention to you, actively interpreting the minutest cues you display in order to make a decision about who you are as quickly as possible. His job may well depend on it. The interviewer is using automatic thinking rather than rational thinking. What behavioral theorists Thaler and Sunstein call the automatic system of decision-making is rapid and instinctive, and it does not involve what we usually associate with the word thinking. It relies heavily on bias to create belief about who you are. Based on the above evidence, it seems we are very good at collecting an accurate impression quickly and on first meeting. But perhaps this consistency between first impression and lasting impression only happens when the person creating the impression does so unconsciously and in earnest. Because in direct opposition to these findings, psychologist Amy Cuddy confirms that social psychology has amassed a great deal of evidence that humans persistently make biased decisions based on minimal, misleading, and misunderstood first impressions. We've clearly demonstrated that first impressions are often flimsy and dangerous. This suggests that with a little preparation, attention to detail, and a few tools, you can control those same judgments, creating a first impression that works for you, rather than represents who you really are. This chapter will help you understand what cues the interviewer is looking for, what common beliefs influence him, and therefore, what positive impressions you can foster without even lying. However you engineer your first impression, it's important to remember the interviewer is highly attentive and suggestible, and the results will be persistent.
Expressive coherence. The most important thing you can do in an interview is something the interviewer probably doesn't even realize he's looking for. It's not that you must be qualified or charming. It's a purely negative baseline need. You must not appear to be sketchy or full of shit in any way. Your presentation of self must be without contradiction. According to social psychologist Irving Goffman, you provide two kinds of information in any interaction. The first is what the other person presumes you control consciously, what you are saying. The second, he presumes you are not conscious of and therefore not actively manipulating nonverbal gestures, your vibe, etc. When your conscious and unconscious cues harmonize, the interviewer will relax and believe you really are who you say you are. This is what Goffman calls expressive coherence. Some people call it the sigh of relief. Conversely, clashing messages between the conscious and unconscious cues, saying "I'd love to" while making a fist, creates an awful, alarming dissonance that taps into some primal survival instinct. Get out of here. Something's not right. An instinct that caused your ancestors to leap shrieking across the veldt away from a deadly rising leopard, who moments ago appeared to be mere dapples in a shady tree. It is the fairy tale fear of wolves dressed as kindly grandmothers and sheep. When you fail to project expressive coherence, it's like what actors call breaking character. the illusion you are presenting as yourself falls apart. This is very distressing to the person you are presenting to, because they're suddenly forced to deal with two contradictory realities concerning you: who you are presenting and what's really going on beneath the surface. This causes cognitive dissonance, a psychological discomfort that comes about whenever two conflicting beliefs present themselves. The moment the other person catches a whiff of dissonance, they'll distrust you, and the interview is over. Humans are very sensitive to cognitive dissonance, and you don't have to be actively lying for them to know something is amiss. They'll grow instantly wary and uneasy when they sense you are not who you present yourself to be. The effect is strong and must be avoided, no matter what. As you are a wolf yourself, mind your cues carefully. You can learn to recognize and control this unconscious information to create a positive, seamless impression. Lots of self-help books, stealing from Dale Carnegie, suggest you have a firm handshake and crinkle your eyes when you smile to seem genuine instead of forced. This is excellent, time-tested advice. Some even go as far as to suggest you put numbing cream on your lips to keep them from twitching when you're nervous but want to seem relaxed. But this is just goofy. Goffman described presenting with expressive coherence as knowing how to protect your own projections. Your best approach is to avoid setting off cognitive dissonance in others in the first place. Foster the impression you have an expressively coherent self and keep contradictory ideas from colliding out in the open as much as possible.
Exploiting cognitive dissonance. Beyond a failure of expressive coherence, cognitive dissonance more broadly defines the mental discomfort caused by two conflicting beliefs, a psychological paradox. These vex people. People find them irritating, and because they don't want to wonder or worry, they will choose one of the incongruent traits to define who the person really is and discard the rest. In George Orwell's 1984, doublethink is a brainwashing technique that gives people the power of holding two contradictory beliefs in one's mind simultaneously and accepting both of them. In fact, the population in 1984 is so beyond feeling mental distress at contradiction. They happily accept the impossible veracity of oxymoronic state slogans like "war is peace" or "freedom is slavery." But this is science fiction, and most people find it exhausting to live with conflicting beliefs, with people who don't make sense, with constant cognitive dissonance. If you want to be in control, learn to embrace the unresolved, live with contradictions, and leave things ambiguous and undecided. This will irritate the people around you to the point where they'll do just about anything to make you make sense. For example, if you want to destabilize that jerk Justin in accounting, a little cognitive dissonance can work wonders. Throw out some competing facts that don't fit together. You know, Justin thinks VP Bruce is a genius, top of the line. Look at the numbers Justin presents and say, "I can't believe it." If these numbers really are correct, Bruce's plan will go completely off the rails by Q4. Justin is suddenly faced with a crisis. Either his belief that Bruce is a genius is false or his own accounting is mistaken. Justin will backtrack. He might even melt his own mind from the inside with doubt. You've thrown him for a minute. It's sadly easy to do. More fun, though, is next-level dissonance control. Say, you want to fuck with Dan, who is probably about to get promoted instead of you. You start the same way. Go to Justin and say, "If these numbers really are correct, Bruce's plan is completely bat's hit." Okay, so you've introduced dissonance in Justin, but how to make it work for you? Offer him a new solution. Are you sure these aren't Dan's numbers? Back this up with some proof that some of these numbers did indeed seem to come from Dan, through a carelessly worded email taken out of context, for example. You have now offered Dan's incompetence as the cure for Justin's dissonance. You can salt the pot with some additional discordant sweet nothings, if you want. If Dan really believed this plan was going to work, would he still be driving that car? But what you've now got is an ally, Justin, who will do whatever he can to take down Dan in order to preserve his own peace of mind. Dissonance is amazing stuff. Develop your naturally high tolerance for dissonance. Open endings, ambiguity, leave your shoes untied. You can literally drive people crazy this way. They will keep trying to fix it or settle it. Just keep kicking the can down the road, and these people will keep struggling valiantly to solve the problem. Eventually, when they come up with an answer that's useful to you, then you can agree with them. When The Wild Bunch premiered, A woman journalist raised her hand at the press conference and asked the following: "Why in the world do you have to show so much blood all over the place?" Ernest Borgnine looked a bit perplexed and fielded the question. "Lady, did you ever see anyone shot by a gun without bleeding? That's gotta be one of the principles behind reality. Accepting things that are hard to comprehend and leaving them that way. And bleeding. Shooting and bleeding." Haruki Murakami, Sputnik Sweetheart.
Dissonance damage control. Doublespeak as opposed to doublethink is a real-world solution to tamping down cognitive dissonance by using tricky language to obscure the conflict between competing realities. Euphemisms are effective for this kind of work. In a country where a majority believe themselves to be good Christians who love their fellow man, why say torture when you can say enhanced interrogation or civilian casualty when you've got collateral damage? Along the playground of politicians smoothing over unpleasant things in faraway places, these velvet words are intended to make people feel more comfortable with something profoundly jarring and at odds with their idea of themselves. The British are really good at this stuff. For example, when someone visibly hammered makes it into tabloids, they are commonly described as tired and emotional instead of drunk. This method pretty well stinks and people are wise to it. It's more fun and effective to call out someone else's feeble attempt to hide behind euphemisms. If a coworker tries to say he was tired and emotional, you can respond, "I don't disagree with you, Stanley, but you did puke all over the elevator." The laugh you get will destroy the euphemism's power. Keep in mind that jokes are a good way to make light of disruptions in your expressive coherence. They remove a sense of seriousness and can relieve tension. If someone makes a joke at your expense, ask them to explain it. Jokes lose vitality when they have to be explained. Spin is another popular method for patching up a bad situation by reducing cognitive dissonance. Rather than employing euphemisms to dampen the news itself, spin concentrates on framing it in a way to seem less shocking. One method is to compare the breaking news with similar underreported realities. The news: brand X kills baby rabbits. The dissonance: oh no, but I love brand X. It keeps my lawns so green. The spin: despite the recent baby rabbit tragedy at Hotel Lapin, there is no evidence brand X poses a greater threat to baby rabbits than any other lawn fertilizer. Cognitive relief: phew, brand X isn't really to blame. I can keep using it just like I want to. Other forms of spin include cherry-picking choice quotations and both surpressing and leaking significant details. Alternative facts are a form of spin which will hopefully be left discarded as a footnote to 2017 politics, file under bullshit. No matter the method, cognitive dissonance is a powerful force people will go to great lengths to alleviate. In Catch-22, Joseph Heller describes the resulting distortion of belief as a protective rationalization. The chaplain had mastered, in a moment of divine intuition, the handy technique of protective rationalization, and he was exhilarated by his discovery. It was miraculous. It was almost no trick at all, he saw, to turn vice into virtue and slander into truth, impotence into abstinence, arrogance into humility, plunder into philanthropy, thievery into honor, blasphemy into wisdom, brutality into patriotism, and sadism into justice. Anybody could do it. It required no brains at all. It merely required no character. You are perfectly suited for this.
The following sections illuminate some of the unconscious cues people are always reading beyond the smile crinkles around your eyes. As you look at them, keep this principle of coherence in mind. Ask yourself, who am I saying I am? And, how can I present this same thing with my body, my clothes, or my voice? If you can keep your unconscious gestures and your conscious assertions in line with one another, if you can express coherence, nothing will get in your way. Practice your expressive coherence. In the limited setting of the interview, you can have far more control over your unconscious gestures than most people would believe. Practice your gestures, your posture. Watch Sex, Lies, and videotape a few times to familiarize yourself with the raw extreme of what interviews can reveal. Then relax. You totally won't have to deal with questions even remotely as touchy as the ones in that movie. Record yourself answering practice questions while speaking directly to the camera. Watch the result, keeping an eye out for any creepiness you might display, like excessive eye contact. Some eye contact is good, staring is not. If you can't tell yourself, get someone to watch the tape and see how they react. Do they cringe when you laugh? Do not to take it out on the watcher. Work on it. The watcher shouldn't be your mom. In fact, the less they know you the better. Hire a TaskRabbit to do it. Say it is an audition tape and ask them to describe the character you're playing. If they say, a sociopath, you're back at square one. Then try it again. Keep practicing until the tape reveals a calm, confident, trustworthy person. True confessions. I would describe myself as someone who is clear-headed, alert, attuned. I see things for what they are without needing to swaddle them in comforting fictions. Sociopaths don't blink as often as other people do, which makes others think us lizard-like and cold, but it's just that we don't share the same need to look away from reality. A blink is a tiny blindness, a momentary hiding, a dark private space in which to cower and coddle your fear. We are not afraid and only blink when we need to moisten our eyes. Daniel Smith, Falconer. Cook City, Montana.
Body language. The science is in. Embodied cognition is real. How we hold ourselves affects how we perceive ourselves, and how others perceive us. The evidence is persuasive that certain postures build confidence, and most importantly, allow us to steamroll people. Expansive, open body language is closely tied to dominance. When we feel powerful, we make ourselves bigger, says psychologist Amy Cuddy. She cites research showing cortisol, stress, and testosterone, aggression, levels change in the body based on posture, and promotes her body control tips as a way to help sad, anxious people who feel like an imposter or a fraud be empowered. You're an imposter, you're just not anxious. Her big finding is that practicing a power posture before you walk into a room is what makes it effective. If you want to brush up on your power stance, watch her TED Talk. Just be warned, she will probably irritate the living shit out of you. She's basically saying all you have to do is go into a bathroom stall and stand like Wonder Woman for 2 minutes and you can become powerful and able to get what you want. It's easy and effective. But whatever you do, don't let anyone see you. Her TED Talk has had millions of views, so if anyone who's seen it glimpses you in a Wonder Woman pose, they will assume you are insecure and suffering from shitty self-esteem, which in turn will empower them to come after you. If you need to power up someplace where you might get seen, consider doing a Nixon instead. The paranoid and brilliant Richard Nixon tried his hand at embodied cognition after losing to young upstart John F. Kennedy. During their televised debate, Nixon looked sweaty and shifty, while handsome Kennedy stared straight into the camera with a good haircut and the world's toothiest smile. This really pissed Nixon off. According to Cuddy's references, Tricky Dick's double V for victory posture should have an empowering effect, and if someone catches you doing it, they might think you're crazy, but never a sucker. Nixon missed one key part in this finding. It's a pre-posture. If you do it at showtime, it doesn't work at all. Tip: if you are forced into a corner where you feel you are being perceived as too aggressive, flip the script. Ask why they are using dominant body language and ask curiously, as if you are genuinely interested, without anger or fear. If they perceive you as hostile, you risk elevating the stakes into a macho standoff.
Mirroring. Echoing the body language of your interviewer is an effective way to make them see you as desirable and acceptable because they feel you are like them and will be comfortable around you. They stroke the chin, you stroke the chin. They adjust their balls and recross their legs, you mirror. Ad infinitum. Every gesture you make which they see as a reflection, or similar to, themselves will make them feel more relaxed around you. And the funny thing is they won't even notice it. Mirroring is a natural, friendly reaction, a soothing gesture of goodwill, placing a warm, fuzzy, hypnotic no need to worry about this guy's blanket over the interviewer's lazy brain. an expression of empathy and rapport, mirroring is not exactly natural for you, and if it's not done right, the unnaturalness of your movements will cause alarm. You might be perceived as autistic or ill or nervous, so take your time. Work on it slowly. If your interviewer frowns, don't jerk your face into a tragic rictus, just droop your lips a little. If the interviewer crosses his leg at the knee, cross yours a moment later at the ankle. It should be a fluid conversation of movements, not, as the name implies, a literal mirror. Perverse reverse. Not suitable for an interview situation, but once you have the job and have some control, one effective way of putting someone off is to avoid mirroring them. While people don't usually notice mirroring because it puts them at ease, they will notice non-mirroring and take it as an expression of hostility. They'll become uncomfortable, but won't know exactly why. Here's a conversation that will never take place. Diane, I think Max feels hostile toward me. Jake, why? Diane, he didn't cross his arms when I did. Jake, oh yeah, you were out of synchrony. You're in for it now.
Code switching. When rich people do something nice for you, you give them a pot of jam. John Gare, 6 Degrees of Separation. The phrase code switching sounds official yet secretive and mysterious, and is a nice way to think about managing your first impression. I am appropriating it. Originally, it was a linguistic term used to signify how people change the way they speak in order to fit in with those around them. Presidential nominee Obama said, "Nah, we straight," when the cashier asked if he wanted his change at Ben's Chili Bowl in a black Washington, D.C. neighborhood, but he certainly wouldn't have said the same to Putin. But code switching can also effectively describe the ways we contrive to broadcast, "This is who I am," or "I'm in your club," cues to others with our manner and appearance. These cues are very specific to time and place. In the 19th century, it was stylish for German aristocrats to cut their own faces to create what looked like dueling scars in order to transmit an aura of bravery and status. But today, mutilated faces are considered a sign of suicidal tendencies. From class rings to pinky rings, sideburns to tasseled loafers, the physical details you present will be presumed to say a lot about you. Use them to present yourself as someone who belongs. How is this special for the sociopath? For most people, code switching is a concerted effort to broadcast who you are, in order to attract like-minded people. But you don't want to attract like people. You want to stay away from like people. And you don't want to broadcast who you really are at all. At the same time, you don't want to appear too bland and featureless. You don't want to just show up in the appropriately priced, brand-approved suit for the job, though you should take care to study and know what that would be, because this will make you seem either really boring, or make people suspect you are hiding something. You want to betray a few details that give the impression that you have an interesting and meaningful private life. You want to seem like you are trying to attract successful, thoughtful, interesting people such as yourself. But you also don't want to come off as trying too hard. Pick a few of the following to concentrate on.
Clothes. Clean as a broke-dick dog. Miles Davis, describing a sharp dresser. Haircuts, shoes, glasses, watches, phones, even perfumes are a quick indicator of your social group, place of origin, income status, and level of meticulousness. You will be judged instantly based on these things. Even things like tiny scars from the earrings a guy wore in high school are noticed and taken into account. The first level of dressing is, of course, meant to show respect for the position you are seeking. Clean, polished, suave, honest, appropriate, etc. It's actually funny how simple some dressing errors are that make people think you're desperately broke or totally insane. Unzipped fly. Mismatching shoes or socks. A noticeable run in your stockings, especially above the knee. Stains of any kind, especially under the armpit. Chipped glasses. Don't wear these things. Ever. It's better to go in underdressed and clean. You should know this by now. But there's more. I have found that people believe that a man in a bow tie will steal. John T. Malloy, Dress for Success. It's not just about getting one over on your interviewer by displaying the cues he wants to see. Studies now show your own brain function is affected by what you wear. Like embodied cognition, enclothed cognition is real. Clothing you wear affects your psychological processes. Your outfit alters how you approach and interact with the world. In a study by Adam D. Galinsky, subjects who wore a doctor's coat showed more sustained and heightened attention compared to those who wore the identical coat, but were told it was a painter's coat. So dress smart for yourself. You need to employ a next level of code switching in order to subtly influence your interviewer. Back in the day, people used to wear class rings to indicate their alma mater. It was an instant indicator that you are in the club. Now, people wear tiny shiny flag pins on their lapels to signify patriotism. But these are still too general. You want to subtly express something to your interviewer which links you specifically to him. While this can be tricky to pull off without being obvious, it can be done to great effect. This requires you learn a little bit about him. Personality will affect your potential boss's sense of style. I have 2 rules. One is, never trust a man who smokes a pipe. The other is, never trust a man with shiny shoes. Charles Bukowski, Hollywood. Get to know the reputation of your potential boss. Flashy? Show some class with a Rolex, even if it's a $20 knockoff from Canal Street. He likely won't notice it's a fake, but if he does, admire his sharp eyesight, admit it's not real, and tell him you aspire to own the genuine article someday. A certain successful headhunter in New York City, whom we'll call Caroline, wears a strange-looking black stone necklace to challenging interviews. When clients ask her what it is, which they invariably do, she tells them it was made from her mother's ashes. Her mother is alive and well. This instantly catches the client off guard, knocks them back, and makes them feel Caroline has revealed something very private and sensitive, thereby softening them up and allowing her to probe into their unguarded secret selves.
Props. For technical jobs, showing up with the right gadgets and proper, high quality, but not new, tools of the trade are important to show you are an expert. While a few key active props are great, you're not a juggler, so don't get too cute with the show and tell. And remember, you can also use latent props that you and your interviewer will both pretend not to pay attention to. A Tiffany bag set down casually by the door, for instance, says you are a classy, thoughtful guy with a hot wife or mistress. The bag is a valuable prop in this kind of work. Mine has a lot of baggage tags on it: SF, LA, New York, Lima, Rome, Bangkok, that sort of thing, and the most prominent tag of all is a very official, plastic-coated thing that says, Photograph Playboy Mag. I bought it from a pimp in Vail, Colorado, and he told me how to use it. Never mention Playboy until you're sure they've seen this thing first, he said. Then, when you see them notice it, that's the time to strike. They'll go belly up every time. This thing is magic, I tell you. Pure magic. Hunter S. Thompson, The Kentucky Derby is decadent and depraved. Props can also be used effectively once you've passed the interview stage and are moving into your new office. It's important to mind the little things. Even in the most monotonous cubicle-filled office, almost everyone will have something personal at their desk. And so should you, because everyone will notice what your thing is, and judge you by it. A totally barren desk will make you seem conspicuously dull. The safest thing is a picture of your spouse and kids or your dog. A droll mug is acceptable, an alma mater mug makes you seem pretentious. Because there is so little of your personal life in evidence, people will make more of these desktop items than they should. When in doubt, opt for funny. Try something goofy and mildly risque, like one of those pens containing a mermaid whose bikini top disappears when you flip the thing upside down. Don't give yourself away with the wrong kind of personal props. Items from Whitey Bulger's estate were recently auctioned off for over $100,000. Aside from a few items that actually had intrinsic value, gold, diamonds, etc., the most coveted objects were those thought to express his pitch-black personality. Two of the most fiercely bidded for items, sometimes known as murderabilia, were a silver skull ring and a pencil holder carved in the shape of a rat, signifying Whitey's extreme hatred of snitches. This type of juvenile shit instantly nails you as a psychopath. Don't bring it to work.
Protect your sources. A famous author I know raps her idiot's guide to whatever books on her office shelf in brown paper, like old school textbooks, so no one who comes in can see she's consulted anything but the most highbrow, original, and difficult to read source material. She comes off as awfully clever. The 80s book Power offers this tip, I think in all sincerity. While crazy and dated, it would be funny as an SNL sketch. A nice touch is to leave out 2 or 3 red folders marked confidential and to push them out of sight once any visitor has noticed them. Just make sure they're bright flaming red. Because everybody keeps their confidential shit in bright flaming red folders marked confidential on their desk. Manners. Manners are largely used by men of the world as a means of self-concealment. Edward Allsworth Ross, Social Control. Almost every movie about an uptight rich family vetting their child's prospective mate has some scene where manners rule the day. Can Johnny properly dismember a lobster? Can Julia pluck a roasted snail from its shell without accidentally flinging it across the restaurant? Who cares? They do. And because they have the money, they get to. It's the same way neat freaks have the right to berate slobs but not vice versa, even when the slob might be a genius visual thinker, and the one who makes his bed every morning with hospital corners is a useless hysteric germaphobe. If you slurp your soup, you are an unworthy bore. You may think this is dumb and you are free to rail against the judgment of Aunt Sue by drinking the dressing from your salad bowl. But an interview or lunch meeting is a different affair. It's not about asserting your rights, it's about making the others comfortable enough with your habits to relax their scrutiny of your true self. Don't be intimidated by manners. Remember, if you believe the scientists, man has been around in some form for roughly 6 million years, civilization for roughly 6,000 years. And forks were considered weird and sinister as late as the early 18th century when Louis XIV himself would not allow his own children to eat with them. People act like it has always been thus. No, it hasn't. Many social niceties are acts of aggression. Shaking hands was originally intended to prove you're not carrying a weapon. Standing at the table when a guest approached allowed you to unsheath your sword if necessary. What's the point of this for you? Learn manners and use them. They're not some mystical age-old secret held by those with class. People make them out to be more difficult or exclusive than they are. Employing impeccable manners will help you hide. That said, if you are at a lunch meeting, don't order a lobster.
Accents. Y'all sound like the news. You, Oregon freshman from Tennessee. Are people going to judge you based on your accent? Yes. There are countless studies that show if you sound Mexican or African American, or have a minority-sounding name, you will have a harder time getting an interview. If you sound regional, people assume you're uneducated, unworldly, or dumb. Sounding foreign may give you an exotic flair, but people will judge you based on the country's stereotype. Sounding French or British may help you. Sounding Russian, not so much. Terrible but true. Perhaps you have one of these accents. What should you do about it? First off, whenever possible, present yourself in person and avoid the phone. When someone sees you, they'll be dazzled by all the positive cues you're giving off, and your accent will become relatively less important. Lots of people go to speech therapists to get rid of an accent. But suppose you fake your accent and get the job. You're going to have to sound like that until you quit or get fired, which is going to be a drag. Maybe there's another way. 11% of Londoners admit to adapting a less posh accent, so they sound more working class, and less like a ponce when trying to get a job or a date. Probably because the Beatles or Keith Richards or whoever made this cool. Concentrate on your vocabulary and speaking clearly rather than worrying about your accent. Stay away from slang. But most importantly, think of your accent as cool. As an asset that gives you street credibility or access to a secret world where those who merely talk like the TV are forbidden entry. In the end, it's all about the attitude. Use your accent with clarity and confidence.
Bias. This is a great time to play on the interviewer's cognitive biases, which are working overtime during this first meeting. Beyond your own presentation, there are common beliefs you can exploit to encourage people to think well of you far outside anything you've asserted directly or through your unconscious presentation.
by offering something positive in these cases and leaving the rest open to interpretation, the interviewer is apt to make a better assumption of you than you could ever argue for yourself. So avoid the temptation to brag. Let them decide they are giving you their seal of approval instead of you trying to wrest it from them. They will trust their own assumption more and think better of you. Exploit the halo effect. Showcase your best attributes upon walking in the door. Because you have one positive attribute, people you meet will assume you have other positive attributes until proven otherwise. Fathers vetting daughters' dates might see the opposite, the cloven hoof effect, or something, where one flicked cigarette can spawn a vision of disaster and bedlam. A useful effect of this halo is that it enables you access to things you might need, as described by Douglas Adams in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. A towel is about the most massively useful thing an interstellar hitchhiker can have. Partly it has great practical value. More importantly, a towel has immense psychological value. For some reason, if a Strag discovers that a hitchhiker has his towel with him, he will automatically assume that he is also in possession of a toothbrush, washcloth, soap, tin of biscuits, flask, compass, map, ball of string, gnat spray, wet weather gear, space suit, etc., etc. Furthermore, the Strag will then happily lend the hitchhiker any of these or a dozen other items that the hitchhiker might have accidentally lost. Enhance your stereotypical self. The interview is a great time to exploit confirmation bias. Before the interview, ask yourself whether you look like you're right out of central casting for the job. When people look at you, they see what they expect to see. The more typical of a particular group you seem to be, the more you match others' ideas of what a member of a group should look, sound, and act like, the more strongly the stereotype will be applied to you. What does this mean for you? First, learn which useful stereotypes fit both you and the situation, then milk them. People generally see what they look for, and hear what they listen for. Harper Lee, To Kill a Mockingbird. For example, imagine an Ivy League legacy named Chase is cruising up to Sausalito to visit a firm he's been trying to get to invest in his tech company just prior to the IPO. He knows successful tech bros are stereotyped as having Asperger's syndrome, so he works his hoodie in clipped diction and lets slip at the meeting, in a slightly squirrely way, that in the early days, his programmer handle was 0. It works. A few weeks later, looking to buoy the new stock price, he pops across the country to a white shoe firm on Wall Street. Wearing a proper suit, broad smile, and firm handshake, he says, "Call me Chase," and offers a nuanced opinion of who really ought to win the America's Cup this year. This also works. If you already seem like you fit in, they are likely to assume you fit in. On the other hand, if you are a brilliant ethnic-looking dude, don't tell the white shoe boys your nickname is Sandy. If you embrace these easy-fit stereotypes when presenting yourself, you will seem more similar and familiar, two things which put people at ease. The important thing is to make sure no one who knows you as 0 runs into you acting like Chase.
The schizophrenic resume. You do not want to present a recruiter with a resume that's all over the place. Often seen as the result of too many interests, lack of focus, or a trust fund, a schizophrenic resume represents a person who might be bright but is also probably uncommitted, disloyal, crazy, and a pain in the ass. Regardless of other qualifications, the recruiter is likely to get a headache trying to make sense of the resume writer and simply toss the dissonant document. Of course, there are plenty of superstars with schizophrenic resumes out there, but try to remember, you are looking for a job, not flaunting your awesomeness. The recruiter's pathetic lack of imagination is not your concern. Chances are you've drifted from job to job more than most, and your trajectory doesn't make easy sense in terms of goals and direction, so change it. Conform your old job descriptions to match the job you're looking to get. Instead of convenience store stock boy, try corporate cashier when trying to land a job at a bank. At some point, HR will call to check on you, so avoid obvious lies like saying you were a manager at some place you've never even been to. Work on smaller fixes. No one at 7-Eleven is going to remember exactly what your job description was last summer. Feather out your employment dates to cover idle time. Omit shady or drifty stuff, even if it was fun and cool at the time. Claim you graduated no matter what, and arrange for someone who doesn't sound like your best friend to give you a recommendation if called. If you get caught, and the chances are decent you will, tell the recruiter to chill the fuck out because you have evidence that 40% of all resumes are partially fabricated anyway. You are just trying to get a fair shake in a cesspool full of liars.
Practical matters. While you will be expending a good deal of energy on expressing yourself with cognitive coherence and basking in the glow of other people's assumptions, there is still some job-specific practical shit you must address during the interview. You'll need to show practical fitness, but don't worry, it matters less than you think. The setup. An important aspect of the interview is establishing your position, worth, and what you deserve. Some people say take any job just to get in the door, with the idea that you can wow your superiors later. But this is desperate advice. Your interviewer is paying more attention to you in the interview than he ever may again. He's trying to decide where you might fit into the organization. Stick to your guns and have a little self-respect. Demand the treatment you want up front. Remember, an individual can more easily make a choice as to what line of treatment to demand at the beginning of an encounter than he can alter the line of treatment once the interaction is underway. In many cases, you won't be hammering out the financial details with your new boss, but at least make sure you're both clear and agreed on your position. Afterward, there will likely be some good cop/bad cop nonsense with HR or a manager trying to chisel you. Don't fall for it. Use your sociopathic gifts to hold your ground. Shop talk. The specific terms, slang, and sometimes odd or esoteric language patterns employed by experts in any given field is shop talk. Used correctly, shop talk can give you instant authority with access, acceptance, and respect, because it shows you're down with the homies. But it's tricky. Even the slightest mistake can give you away. For example, in Inglourious Bastard, a British spy pretending to be German gives himself away by indicating 3 with 3 fingers, the British way, rather than the German way, with 2 fingers and the thumb. A tiny, deadly mistake. And it happens fast. People will give you street cred if you use shop talk impeccably, but use it wrong, and you instantly look like a fraud. So err on the side of caution before throwing around specialty words you aren't fully confident of. Make an effort to learn them, they can help you. But also remember, shop talk is a double-edged sword. Invoke the big picture clause. When you don't know something specific or detailed, take evasive action. Say you're an idea man looking at the big picture. You leave it to the technicians to sweat the details. After all, you're a visionary, not just a wrist. Bold ideas are your forte. Try describing yourself as a comprehensive visionary type versus someone with a limited perspective. It's fun and effective. Tip: that old antiperspirant ad was right. Never let them see you sweat.